So main lesson of this film, if your dead mother comes back as a ghost to warn you to not go to a certain place, probably don't go to that certain place ever, because just avoid a lot of bad things if that happens. Hello once again, watchers of Good Movies. My name is Nick Pell, and this is once again coming from my apartment. Now today we are going to be talking about the film Crimson Peak. This is a film by Guillermo del Toro. I haven't seen a ton of his films, admittedly, but I was very interested in this one. I've seen trailers just thrown in my face for the last couple months for this film, so I've been extremely intrigued with what this film ultimately is. And a lot of people haven't really been able to describe it all that well, because the trailers kind of make it out to be this horror film with ghosts and everything, and it is that to an extent. It has these kind of horror-esque elements, but they're used kind of just more as a creepiness factor. None of the ghosts in this film are just used to kind of scare you. It's just kind of more a creepy thing. And yes, there are some jump scares possibly. I didn't get caught by any of them. But I don't think it's fair to just call this film a straight horror film. I've also heard it called a gothic romance of sorts. And yes, to an extent, it is that. It has this romantic aspect to it between the two lead characters. And so there is that part that is kind of a centerpiece of the film per se. But I think that the film is ultimately kind of just this mixture of a horror, a romance, and ultimately a mystery. The film is ultimately about Mia Wasikowska, who plays this kind of innocent girl. She wants to be a writer, and she is swept off her feet essentially by Tom Hiddleston, who is just this European guy who wants to get money from her father to invest in his machine, and ends up marrying her after some events take place, and she ends up at his mansion. And as she is living there, she starts to just see these very strange occurrences start to happen. She starts to investigate, and it turns out that there's more to Tom Hiddleston and his sister, Jessica Chastain, than really seems to meet the eye. And I ultimately found myself very engaged with this film. You really have to go into it with an open mind. I had no real expectation for what this movie was ultimately going to be. I went into it and just let the movie present itself to me as it was, and I think that's the ultimately best way to approach this film, because if you go into it expecting it to be just this horror film that's going to just scare the shit out of you, you're going to be severely disappointed, because this film takes itself seriously, and it's a very smart mystery, I thought. The chemistry between the two leads does help the film's story be a little bit more realistic and believable, because you kind of have to buy that she's just going to stay here in this place where really strange stuff is happening and things don't ultimately seem right, because she does ultimately care about this person. The music in this film is easily one of the high points of it, in my opinion, because there are scenes more at the beginning where it's actually more relying on the creepiness factor than in the second half, where it dives more thoroughly into the mystery aspect of it, where it just, the noise effects, just like a single key on the piano, or just like certain effects that I can't point out per se, just really help to add tension to some of these scenes and make them a lot more effective in the ultimate film. I also like that a lot of these characters actually have depth to them. They could have been very one-dimensional. Tom Hiddleston and Jessica Chastain, their characters, more than any others, I think really have a large amount of depth to them. You see kind of why they end up doing what they have been doing. And you see kind of the conflict more in Tom Hiddleston than anyone else, as he's kind of going back and forth on whether or not he ultimately wants to go through with this plan that him and his sister have. And you see some more depth of Jessica Chastain, who is ultimately kind of more the bad character, per se, and just kind of what makes her tick and her kind of inner thoughts and motivations. And I really like seeing that part of these two characters, because they could have, like I said, made them very simplistic and casual and things that we've seen before, but they add a lot of layers to these characters, which make them a lot more relatable, and that really helps to drive the film forward as, again, it goes from beginning to end. And the last thing I really did enjoy about the film was the fact that it has such great imagery. For example, just the idea that there's this red liquid deep beneath in these kind of caves that Tom Hiddleston is trying to uncover, and it's just seeping up through the floors and through the walls, and ultimately just covering the snow, which gives kind of the image of this white snow. You see the snow just pure white, and then just it slowly becomes infected with the red, and kind of gives the image of this loss of innocence. Even when it's just in the house, the obvious connection that it's like, oh hey, this is blood. It just kind of gives that cool imagery, and this isn't something I usually see and pick out of films, but it was so neat to see it used so effectively in this film, and just the messages that it just conveys with just that it made the film so much better just because of it. My only real gripe with the film is that the ending part per se, I won't spoil it obviously, the ending is ultimately stuff that we have seen before in regards to just kind of how events do play out with some characters. And so that was, just kind of thinking about it afterwards, just something that wasn't as original as some of the rest of this film was. But it ultimately didn't really hinder the film for me too much, because I thought that the ending, while it isn't the most original part of the film, was still done very, very well and very effectively. The film relies on the idea that ghosts exist, and that this lead character is the only one who can see them, and it's used very effectively in the film, in my opinion. Like I said, the ghosts aren't used for the purpose of developing a horror experience with this film. It's not supposed to be a horror film, I don't think. It's just supposed to kind of add to the tension and the ultimate creepiness, at least in the first hour of the film, where this stuff is just kind of enveloped before we really know the whole context behind everything that has happened in this house. Yeah, ultimately I really enjoyed Crimson Peak. Like I said, if you go into it without really any expectation of what the film is going to be, just let it play out for you and just watch the film as a film and let it surprise you at points. You are going to really enjoy it, just like I did. So I definitely recommend going and check out Crimson Peak if this is your type of film. It's not going to be for everyone, obviously, but I found myself really entertained by it. But those are just my thoughts, guys. Did you like the film as much as I did? Did you hate it more than I did? Let me know. Like, favorite, comment, and subscribe once again if you so choose. I appreciate it immensely. And as always, people, my name is Nick Pell. And once again, keep on watching.